Hi, everybody. Um, Welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and see where you're from. Our friend and regular attender, Rob Plass, has already done that to model for everybody. Although if you just came on, you might not be able to see in the chat. I am putting in the chat right now. I almost said posting, and I hear my teenager saying it's not posting when it's a Zoom chat, but that's a different halacha of what you call these things. I put a link in the chat to the slides for today, but I'll put the slides up on the screen. But I know some of you like to look at them later, or even in a different window while we're going. So it's there in the screen, and in a few minutes I will do it again, so it's at the bottom. So we've started Masachet Sotah, and as Rachel said, we're 3 weeks in, but it's our first time together. And a new Masachet always brings with it new excitement, new topics, new things. There are ways in which Masachet Sotah is connected to the Masachtot in Seder Nashim, in this part of the Mishnah really that we're studying right now. That deals with laws connected to women. It's really connected to the Masechtot that are about marriage, because Sotah is a Masechet about what happens if a husband is suspicious that his wife has been unfaithful in marriage. There's a way in which these Mishnayot could have been part of Masachet Ketubot, right? We looked at lots of things connected to marriage and how it's structured and how it works in that Masachet or other places like that. It's separated out in part because it's sort of in the Torah, it's separated out as its own set of verses in its own section. And actually, the Masachet begins, right? Sotah in the Torah, the laws come right next to the laws of Nazir. There's a whole conversation to begin our Masachet about what should be the order of the Masechtot. Should Sotah come first and Nazir come second, or vice versa? It's a little insight that the rabbis give in the discussion of the Talmud about the editing of the order of the Mishnah, which we don't always get, right? The scholars sometimes give us insight about that, but here we have in the opening of our Masachet a direct conversation about that. But Sotah is separate, though, from Masachet Ketubot or the other Masechtot that talk about marriage, and I'm actually, some level, happy about that. Not that I'm happy with the laws of Sotah. This, again, is tough things to read as a modern with a very different understanding of marriage and relationships and accountability and how we handle it. Right, this vision of the Sotah from the Torah is not one that holds sway in the communities that I live in, and that's sort of why I'm happy that it's separated out as a Masachet. Because in some ways we get to see how the rabbis deal with this matter on its own. And I say that as an introduction, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to put the link one more time and switch to my slides. There's something that we saw right at the beginning of the Masachet that gives some insight to how the rabbis frame this Masachet as a whole. And for me, it's been really helpful to stay sane, especially in moments where the particulars of the. Oh, here you go. I'm sharing my screen. Sorry, here's my email that says I'm supposed to be on the Zoom now. There we go. Here are my slides. It frames how the rabbis are thinking about this, and for me, it's been a really helpful frame in thinking about. Oh, sorry, I hit the wrong button. There we go. 3 weeks without getting together. I'm totally out of practice. Okay. The frame of the rabbis is helpful to me in thinking about how they understood Sotah and its influence, how I frame my reading of this Masachet. Okay. So I just want to look at, this is a little bit of a grammar moment of looking at the Masachet begins Hamikaneh leishto, one who issues a warning to his wife. I have a warning. Sorry. Oh my God, I'm all thumbs today. All right, pardon the double extra words in the second phrase that you see on your screen. That's an error on my part, which we're just going to have to live with for a second right now. But I just want to point out the difference between one who issues a warning to his wife and one issues a warning to his wife. Let me even pause a second and give you a chance to think about it. If you have some ideas, what might be. Oh, Emily says better more warning than less, maybe for emphasis. Maybe, but a warning, I have to say there is really totally just a typing error on my part. But thanks, Emily, for that. The first Mishnah that we have that opens this Masechet says one who issues a warning to his wife and not one issues a warning to his wife. And the rabbis note that, and they use this difference between one who and just one to make what I think is a really important point. And I'm going to bring that up right now. So the Mishnah says one who issues a warning to his wife, and the Gemara says apparently, apparently the Tana of our Mishnah holds that it is prohibited to issue a warning to one's wife ab initio in a matter that can cause her to become a sotah, and all the laws and all the halachot, the laws concerning a sotah, are for one who issued a warning when not obligated to do so. Now, let me unpack that a little bit. There's some Gemara logic and grammar to that. The Gemara is saying the Mishnah could have said one issues a warning to his wife, which would mean when a husband is jealous, they have an obligation to issue a warning and start the sotah process. But it's not phrased that way. It says one who issues, and that means this is a case of what the rabbis call b'diavad, after the fact, meaning this interpretation of the Mishnah says all the laws that we're going to read in this Masechet about what to do with the sotah happens if a husband gets jealous and warns his wife. This is what we have to do. But really, a husband should not do this. A husband should not issue a warning. They're not obligated to do so. And even the opening statement here in the Gemara says of this snippet, the Tana of our Mishnah holds that it's prohibited to issue a warning. And for me, this was a powerful little, it's really like 6 words in the Gemara, but it was really powerful statement with the rabbi saying, these verses that are in the Torah that we have, they're on the books, we should not ever implement them. This is not something that sticks with us to our day. Now we know historically, ultimately, even still in the temple time, the rabbis did away with the sotah ritual, and our tradition reports that this is something that was phased out. Some of the logic behind that is that people were, I guess it was a little more theological, The sotah ritual is dependent on divine intervention, a miracle of a sort. God has to step in to make the waters act or not act. And there was a sense that, who are we to be the beneficiaries of miracles and divine intervention? We shouldn't rely, the rabbis say a lot, we shouldn't rely on a miracle, and that leads them not to rely on this ritual as a way to settle the dispute. But for me, I found this statement to be really powerful, that the Gemara is saying everything that we're reading here is really theoretical, and we should never have to put it into practice. I find comfort in that because as I read it, I'm saying, oh, this is awful. We should never put this into practice. It's one of those areas of Jewish law that I wish was not a part of the tradition, because it's a little, for me anyways, a little embarrassing that, our tradition has this. It's not the only thing. But it's also a place where the rabbis say, we're going to try to frame this so this never comes to be. This is on the books. Because it's on the books, there are verses, they interpret them. It's part of the academic exercise in the Beit Midrash of reading these chapters of the Mishnah and interpreting them. So we have Gemara on it like other things. But these 6 or 7 words from the beginning of the Masechet really stood out to me and said, hey, this is really just academic. We're reading something that even in the days of the rabbis, they said, this is not something we should be doing. That's also feels to me empowering, especially with where I place myself within the Jewish community as a conservative rabbi. It resonates for me that tradition is very important, and there are times when the parts of the tradition that we inherit are so foreign or so off track or are problematic socially, ethically, morally that we make changes to account for that as our understanding of the world changes. And here we see an example of the rabbis doing that. And with this frame, it's made the read of the Masechet much easier for me, unlike Masechet Ketubot, which I said, earlier, in some ways relates to this Masechet in terms of, laws that govern, how a marriage works, because the Ketubah, while not a legally binding document in the same way that it was in the rabbinic era, but we still lean on the Ketubah and the language of Masechet Ketubot, right, in the marriage contracts that we still use in our wedding. And so there's something about Ketubot and the things that were hard to read there hit me differently because there are ways and still that we rely on that area of law in our practice today. But here's a place that says, this is not how we deal with marital conflict and infidelity and jealousy. This system that the Torah reports that the Masechet deals with isn't one that we should ever invoke. If a husband feels some jealousy towards his wife, it's prohibited to him to issue the warning that the Torah says he can issue, and we should find other ways to deal with this. And with this little piece of Gemara, I am fully on board, both, I don't know, as a Jew and as a rabbi, and I like that it was here. And for me, as I said, it made the reading of these opening pages of the Masechet much easier to stomach, knowing that it was theoretical and not practical, that it was something to talk about, to interpret, to use the tools of Gemara to unpack the Mishnah, but not something that at least this voice in the Gemara speaking about their understanding of the Mishnah thought that ever should happen. We'll dig into more stuff about the Sota, I imagine, in weeks to come as we still have a little more time. But I wanted to move for the second half to a different set of texts that come from just recently in our study that reflect a different part of Masechet Sota. Masechet Sota, in addition to dealing with the Sota, is full of Midrash, is full of Agadah, has even whole chapters that don't relate to the Sota at all. And in some ways, we haven't had material as rich as this all the way back since potentially, the quantity of it since Masechet Brachot way at the beginning. We've had some in other places, but there's a lot in Masechet Sota, and I found some that were really enjoyable to me. And when we think about highlights of the week, these were some of my highlights of the week. So this is all based off something that Rabbi Yoshua was quoted as saying in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yoshua would say, a foolish man of piety and a conniving wicked person and an abstinent woman and those who injure themselves out of false abstinence, all these are people who erode the world. Rabbi Yoshua has this list. These people erode the world. And now he just makes the list. And of course, we know if someone in the Mishnah presents like a list, the Gemara is going to say, well, tell me what all these things are on the list. And I pulled out some of the descriptions that the Gemara brings for some of the items on the list. There's more here. You can look at Sota 21 A and B, and you can see the full list. But the Gemara asks, who is considered a foolish man of piety? For example, it says, if one who sees that a woman is drowning in a river and says, it's not proper conduct to look at her while she is undressed and then to save her. Right. So what's a foolish person of piety? This is a great example, right? We have certain rules of modesty, right? You're not supposed to look upon someone who is naked, especially someone of a different gender. And here we have a woman who fell into the river and is drowning, and somehow maybe she was bathing, so she was undressed, or somehow the pace of the river caused her to be immodestly dressed while drowning. The foolish pious person places the piety of not looking upon her while she is undressed over the saving of her life, and chooses, I can't save her because she's naked, and that would be immodest of me to do. Foolish piety, says the Gemara. This is one example of that. And here are a few more. Here are a few more about that. Moving to the next item. Who's considered a conniving, wicked person? Rabbi Yochanan says this is one who presents his statements to the judge before the other litigants come, and thereby prejudices the judge in his favor. So here's what conniving and wicked person. We see this, I think there's something similar to Rabbi Yochanan's statement in Pirkei Avot as advice to the judge, right? Don't talk to one of the litigants while the other litigants haven't arrived in the court yet. But Rabbi Yochanan says a conniving person is someone who goes in to try to influence the judges before the trial starts. Not just immoral, unethical, or maybe wicked here, but conniving in the sense that it's a little sneaky. Not the only example they bring to explain why conniving, wicked people erode the world, but here's the second one. Rabbi Abahu says, this refers to one who gives a dinar to a poor person in order to complete the sum of 200 dinars for him, so he'll no longer be entitled to receive charity. I'll unpack that a little bit. There's right, of course, right. It's a mitzvah it's an obligation to support the poor. Someone who has less than 200 dinarim isn't eligible for all of the charity that they are when they if you have less than 200 dinarim, you're eligible for certain assistance that you're not eligible for if you have more. For example, there are laws about the public soup kitchen that towns are supposed to have, and who qualifies for receiving meals from the soup kitchen. And once you have 200 dinarim in your possession, you're not eligible for that assistance anymore. So Rabbi Abahu says, like someone who targets their charity to give someone the sum of money that will just get them above the threshold of assistance, that's conniving and wicked. So you might think, what's bad? Here's a poor person, I have a dinar, I'm going to give it to them. But if you intentionally are adjusting the size of your charity to make someone ineligible to continue to receive public support, Rabbi Abahu says that's conniving and wicked. Maybe not for us an individual charity principle and thinking about our own donations, but definitely a public policy rule about what we do to how we adjust who qualifies for what. And this is a debate in our world today as aid that was given during the pandemic, technically, right, by the rules of the government, lifted a whole bunch of families out of poverty by giving them a certain amount of aid. And as those levels of assistance ran out, it changed where people were in the system. And some of the conversations about, I don't mean to enter politics in the Gemara shiur, but some of that conversation is about, who should be entitled to what benefit, what level of people need assistance, and how do we design those policies. And Rabbi Abahu is saying, don't design it specifically to give the minimum to people so that you don't have to give them any more. Think more about how to support them in the long run. Rav Yosef Bar Chama says that Rav Sheshet said, a conniving, wicked person is one who persuades others with his ways, convincing others to mimic his seemingly righteous behavior in order to hide his own faults. So here's someone with influence who isn't a model of proper behavior, but convinces other people to follow him. Come on, do what I'm doing it my way. And by bringing people along with him, he covers his own faults because there's a group to cover for him. So someone who manipulates the crowd to cover his own faux pas is deemed by Rav Sheshet a conniving, wicked person that erodes the world. Rabbi Zarika says that Rav Huna says a conniving, wicked person is one who is lenient in the halakha for himself and strict with others. So I know this is a Jewish law topic. I know as a parent, sometimes I hear this from my children. Not that I'm a conniving, wicked person, but I'm called out on the carpet for having different rules for them than I do for me. I'm very lenient about bedtime for me, but not so lenient about bedtime for them. Maybe that's good parenting. Maybe, as my kids might argue, I'm eroding the world. But we can leave the parent example aside. But we know from the Gemara, our study of Gemara, about many issues, there are many opinions, some lenient, some strict. And Rav Huna says here, you can't adopt the lenient opinions for you always, and always put the strict opinions on your rulings for others. You got to think about consistency between how you advise others and your own practice. Last one, Ula says, someone who erodes the world. This one was interesting to me. It's a different area too. This is one who read the written Torah and learned the Mishnah, but didn't serve Torah scholars in order to learn the reasoning behind the halachot. So here, serve doesn't mean like work for, right? Students sort of apprenticed with the teachers. What's Ula saying? If you only read the Torah and the Mishnah, but don't go forward to learn the reason and the meaning behind the halachot, which is the Gemara and beyond, you're not seeing the full picture, and not seeing the full picture here about Judaism and how it all works. Ula says in some ways might erode the world. So while some of the other categories were about ethical behavior or maybe about communal leadership or public policy, this one's about approach to study of Torah, but it's a recognition in Ula's eyes anyways. And Ula's a later Amora in the Gemara that the Torah and the Mishnah don't suffice. There's more to Judaism beyond Torah and the Mishnah, and learning the reasoning behind the halachot and the conversations that came into the Gemara are important as part of the process, and you have to do that too. There's a series of people who build off of Ula. It becomes a little more for them, contemporary politics also, because some people identify who are they talking about here. Some people say the ignoramus, but some people say Ula's talking about Samaritans. There were other groups of practicing Jews in the rabbis' world who said, we only follow the Torah, we don't follow the rabbinic tradition. And those groups rejected what the rabbis did with the Torah and just followed the Torah piece. So Ula's statement, and some of them might be political, social, saying there are other groups who take some of our tradition, but not all of it. That's not right. I tend to see this as though him saying, you got to study, you got to keep studying. There's always more, and there's more layers. And while, especially here in Masechet Sotah, just the Torah on its own doesn't give you the full picture, and seeing how that develops in tradition helps us see where that go. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And I see from my clock that I was a little more long-winded than I meant to be in my original plan. I left us a few minutes for comments and questions. Apologies that I didn't leave us more. I see some politics in the chat too.
I think, Rabbi Goldberg, that all of us are reminded of people, either public figures or people in our own lives, with those examples of people who erode the world. And it might be a little bit cathartic, yes, connecting them. But I'm not going to initiate a political conversation on My Jewish Learning. We try not, or at least a partisan political conversation. We try not to do that.
Yes.
But I actually think there's also a lot of interest in going back to this idea that the material in Tractate Sotah is theoretical. I was thinking about this again this week because this week's Parsha is Tazria Mitzorah, which is all about the rules of the person with sara'at, right? This often gets mistranslated as leprosy. It's not leprosy. Leprosy is Hansen's disease. It's a medical condition. Sara'at is a spiritual condition, primarily with physical manifestations. And that's why it can infect a person, or it can infect a house, or it can infect a piece of cloth, right? It's not it's not an illness per se. And that's another example, if I'm not mistaken, of something that the rabbis understood was no longer diagnosed, was no longer in the world, even in their time, right? Yeah. Another thing that had fallen, we haven't really encountered it in much detail yet in Daf Yomi. But it is interesting, there are these pockets of biblical law, right? The stuff on the person with Tzara'at on the Mitzvah is significant. There's 2 very long chapters in the middle of Leviticus that we will read in Shul this week. And the Sota stuff is significant in length and clear in the Torah, but there are these things that they understand to no longer be operative. And they don't always tell us why, right? They don't say, we consider this unethical, though that could be behind it. Actually, there's something sort of at the very end of Tractate Sota that's almost the opposite. It's I forget who says it, but some rabbi says something like, we canceled Sota because there were so many women who were running around on their husbands, and we just decided that we would take, and then he finds a verse from the prophets that shows God will have forgiveness on adulterers. It says basically we're washing our hands of it. But yeah, I think people are interested in discussing a little bit why the rabbis would build up all of this very detailed discussion as if it's operative, as if we need to know how it works, when they've candidly said it's not.
Yeah.
Interesting question.
That's a great point. My answer to that is that we're not stuck with it. It's in the tradition, right? It's in the Torah. It's in the Mishnah, and the project that is the Gemara is to have these conversations about what's in the Mishnah. And so the studying of Sota leads to the explaining what's here in the tradition, and some of that is what the rabbis are doing with every Masachet, right? Because it's here, not for any practical purpose. It does give them opportunities to shed light on, should we have this or should we not have this? I mean, by the rabbi's day, anyways, without the temple, right? Even though the rabbi said this stopped before, it would have been moot anyways, because the temple, once the temple was destroyed, we didn't do all of these things. Some of the parts of the Mishnah that are explained in the Gemara that have to do with the temple, there are arguments about the conversations were meant to keep those texts and those traditions alive, so that should the temple be restored, in the nearer future, they would have a memory of it to reinstate some things that, now 2,000 years later, I would say the mainstream of Judaism isn't aspiring to restore a temple and temple worship. I think some of it is because it's here, we have to interpret it. Because there are verses, we have to understand what they mean. Because there's a Mishnah, we have to clarify it. We're applying the same tools of the Talmud to this Masechet that we do to others, even as we know this is something that, it appears, at least from that text that I brought, that the rabbis were not interested in having this happen. Although there is, as I say this, embedded in that statement is why we need it, meaning if it's prohibited to do so and a husband still does, it might be prohibited. The rabbis might say, don't do this. But a husband who knows the Torah, who's jealous of his wife, could issue the warning, and then we might be stuck in the procedure. So even if it's a b'diavad case, an after the fact case, spelling out the rules could be important for the husband who does it anyways. And that actually, I just want to say, I know we're almost out of time, is what I want to connect. I wonder, this is the connection between the two parts of today. It could be that your Rabbi Yeshua's list, comes in as a tangent, as connected to something else he said in a Mishnah, and might just be here because it's here, not because it's connected to Masechet Sotah. But I wonder, are some of these things on his list about people who rode the world? Does the person who's lacks fidelity in marriage, or is the person who's overly jealous in marriage, or is the husband who invokes the Sotah that shouldn't, are those categories of people who erode the world, or who are wickedly cruel or something? And I wonder if there's a reason this list from Rabbi Yoshua came to this Masechet as a commentary from Rabbi Yoshua about the characters who are in this Masechta in and around the Sotah ritual that their behaviors, well, maybe this isn't the ritual we want to use anymore, but their behaviors somehow erode the world, and there's an ethical commentary there.
Thank you. I will also just tag on to the other conversation. I just wanted to highlight Rob Starr points out that this gets to the theoretical question that we sometimes circle back to about what is the Talmud, right? Like what are the rabbis doing? Are they creating a legal text? Are they creating a law code, or are they creating an instruction manual for people to learn the law? And we have this article I popped in the chat by B'nai Lapé to Rob Starr, to your point, that she argues very strongly that the Talmud is just about teaching people how to think legally, that the content doesn't matter. I think that goes too far. I think they do care a lot about the content too, and not just the form of the law. But it is moments like this where it is all theoretical that you can see that maybe a lot of it is about the joy of figuring out the law and the legal puzzles more than about the practical application. So I just wanted to pop that in case that was useful to anyone. And we are at time. So thank you, Rabbi Goldberg, for giving us a nice introduction to Sotah 3 weeks in. That's a difficult order, difficult task, but you gave us some from the beginning and some from this week, and we really appreciate it. Thank you to all of you, of course, for your really insightful and thoughtful comments and discussion. And it is nice to be back in the saddle with this class. And we will see you here next week and in your inbox tomorrow morning. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Bye.